If you read this, interesting, this is what interests me. I don't want to talk about analysis of plays or what it means. We've beaten those to death in high school. All right. How many people in high school read Shakespeare?
How many people what?
Read Shakespeare. All right. How many hated it? Okay, there's a couple over there. You hated it, huh?
Some of it.
That's because the high school teachers really don't. Would I use the mic? Would that help you, Dick? Should I use the
No, I
mic?
can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how long that's going to last.
Should I sit over there?
What's that?
Should I sit over there so I can hear you better? Because it doesn't matter.
There's a mic sitting right there.
It might sound worse. It's probably better off being in normal voice.
All right. Well, you move.
Yes, I'm moving.
You move. We don't talk about this. How many read Shakespeare in high school? Okay. Now the question is, which ones? Helen Collins Dane. How about the Scottish tragedy, which we won't talk about? I don't want to call it the Scottish tragedy because it's bad luck. I'm thinking.
No, that's it.
Okay. You're not.
I'm just gonna sit right here.
Okay, then. All right, now the Scottish tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. Everybody's read that. And how about let's see another one.
Is this a dagger which I see before me? What was that?
What was that?
Is this a dagger which I see before me?
That would be the Scottish tragedy. Very good. And I don't like to quote it because it's unlike when that play came to America before Abraham Lincoln, the opening night, the lead died, and the next night, the lady lead died. Oh. They brought it to New York a couple of years ago. One of the swords flew off the stage and was embedded in an audience member's leg. Hence, every time I've done a show and somebody's been reading it, has it in their back pocket, the show gets screwed up. So the cure for that is to spin around 3 times, go out the door, and spit. Now, there's a lot of spit outside of Brundage Park Playhouse, let me tell you. So that's the legend that goes with it. The thing is, Shakespeare supposedly stopped writing that play and got Thomas Middleton, who had written a play called The Witches, to put the real witch incantations in that play. If you believe that, okay. And the other point was James II, who owned, right where we're sitting, he owned most of New Jersey, was obsessed with witches, and it was he who linked to the witch trials in Salem. He wore a padded suit because he was afraid he'd be stabbed. He was afraid he'd be poisoned, and he had his partner, boyfriend, sitting next to him on the throne, the Duke of Buckingham. He was openly gay, and so Shakespeare had to make some alteration. But if you look at, if we offend, it is with our goodwill. Goodwill was Shakespeare's nickname. He said that you should think we come to offend, but with goodwill. If we offend, it is with our goodwill. This is for Midsummer Night's Dream, and he's making fun of himself. Goodwill. To show you our simple skill, that is the true beginning of our end. It's all garbled language, making fun of himself as a playwright. Let's get on with Willie. This is my inspiration. I have to tell you this. Why did I ever get interested in Shakespeare? I was at NYU, was a biology major, and the longest waiting list for an elective was Shakespeare. Why? This gentleman, Richard Harrier, who was probably one of the most amazing professors I ever had, got me flipped the switch. His classes were 150 people, closed, and he would walk in, open the textbook, and start to talk after he called you by name in the roll after taking attendance once. And he ended up at Harvard. He's from Allentown, PA. Then in graduate school, I got this gentleman, Professor Peter Alexander from the University of Glasgow, who was a visiting prof. He wrote the definitive biography of Shakespeare, and he was really good to me. And he fought with this gentleman, Lawrence of Arabia, in Damascus. He's a crusty old Scot. And he said to me, "Laddie, do you know what a Rose Theatre is?" I said, no, sir. And he drew a map of London on the board. Come in the next week, "Laddie, do you remember where the Rose Theatre was?" Thank you, Professor. Now, this fellow is the gentleman, Patrick Tucker, is a director of emergency in New York, in London. He was the assistant artistic director of the Globe Theater. This was his partner who was in Carry On Nurse, that whole series years ago. And I used his theory of directing Shakespeare, which is the original script, as a basis for my doctoral dissertation. Now, Patrick Tucker believes Shakespeare's actors did not rehearse, and that, oh, don't tell that to an English teacher today. When and how? Candles were expensive. They had no space. There were no lights. And if you went into the bar, as everybody did, they had torches, which were smoky. So we'll show you later how an Elizabethan night worked if we have time. So let's take a look. These are all the different qualities of Shakespeare. There's a lot of argument about whether he wrote it or did not write it. I firmly believe he did. The evidence is in the plays, and it's not even worth being discussed. Why they brought it up? Because, let's face it, like today, Taylor Swift, there's your, nobody likes her. She makes a lot of money. Shakespeare made a bundle. He put meat in the seats. He was very wealthy and equipped. And his other playwrights who were writing all this poetic carry on hated him because they weren't selling tickets. It's as simple as that. And Elizabethan London, we'll look at in a minute. Now, this is probably the most interesting portrait, but we think his hair was red. He was balding. He wore an earring. And he said, never crossed out a line. He wrote the script. He'd write it Sunday night, give it to you Monday. Now, did I skip us? Oh, come on, slides, don't do that to me.
You just had it. Whoa. Yeah, you can move it wherever you want. I just uh-oh. There you go.
Okay. This is a bed and breakfast. Thea and I stayed in London. How many years ago? I forgot. It's a long time ago. This was built before Shakespeare was born. The early 1500s. Lovely old place. Nice old lady. But there were some interesting factors. The door was 5 feet tall. She had a duck when you went in up. You see all this. It's a very kind of something out of a movie set. And we had a wonderful time, but also you realize how they live. Bathroom, not in the room. This is Shakespeare's mommy's house in Arden now. For years, for 100 years, they thought another house was his mother's house. And only about 5 years ago, they discovered, oops, this was the house where she lived. Now, Mary Arden was very, very wealthy, very Catholic, and she got in trouble for hiding Jesuits. I don't know if you were aware, but religion was a big, horrible thing in Elizabethan England. When Bloody Mary, Elizabeth's sister, was on the throne, hence only thing she ever did was give her name to the drink Bloody Mary. Why? Because she kept burning Protestants in Smithfield. If you weren't Catholic, whoops, there you go, got torched. That was a problem because Mary Arden was hiding Jesuits in her house later on when Elizabeth became queen. And then it wasn't good to be a Catholic, you had to be a Protestant, which is why Shakespeare's father, and they just found this a month or two ago, Shakespeare's father hid a will in the attic of his house that says, look, God, I'm really a Catholic, but I have to be a Protestant. So therefore, I'm putting this will. So I'll be buried a Catholic. Why? Because you were fined if you did not go to communion. And you had to go 2 or 3 communions a year, or you got put in jail. Not a good thing. So, moving on. This is Shakespeare's family. Brother Edmund was born in 1580. He was an actor, and he's still buried in St. Mary over the river, or St. Mary's Ovary, as they call it. He was probably a farmer, but they think he was an actor. And the reason they do was his funeral was in the morning. The reason his funeral was in the morning is because all plays were at 3 o'clock in the afternoon with daylight.
So they had to bury poor old Eddie here in the morning so the actors could attend the funeral. This is Shakespeare's house. He's born 23rd of April, 1504. And he dies the 23rd of April, 1616. A couple interesting things. First of all, the British call this the birthplace. Okay. And in the backyard, and I haven't figured this out yet, there's a statue of the Indian playwright Tagore. No clue. He's way after Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare's about 12 years old. He's living in Stratford-on-Avon. His father, they think, was a glover, a tanner, whatever you might think. He was also probably the mayor of Stratford until he didn't go to communion and they got rid of that. And the other problem they had was he took all the poop from the sheep. He only did sheep leather outside the front door. Elizabethan England was pretty disgusting. It really was at that point. But when he's 12 years old, Shakespeare's father takes him back through the woods to Kenilworth Castle. Now, Kenilworth Castle, it's also the title of a Walter Scott novel. It's still there, looks like that. And what had happened is Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, had a boyfriend. No matter what you read, she had quite a few boyfriends. And this is Earl of Essex, her Robin, her lover. And unfortunately, that's another great story, but at her death, they found the last letter from him clutched in her hand. Father takes him through the woods to the moat, where the Earl of Essex has spent close to $1 million in their money, putting a parade on water around the moat. And the first time that fireworks were ever used. So she called him Robin. But in Midsummer Night's Dream, Oberon, the fairy, turns and talks about the mermaid on the dolphin's back. I saw it, but you did not. Then Cupid shot an arrow and it missed you, all that. And the interesting thing is, this is in Midsummer Night's Dream, and it actually existed. And Shakespeare was there. He'd be the only one who was there. So we're pretty sure he was at this event when he was 12. Well, he goes to Latin grammar school. Let's get to the siblings. Joan Shakespeare, 1558. That she died. Then she had another sister, Joan, 1569. And those are the only tangential descendants of William Shakespeare today from Joan. One of her children became an actor later on in the 17th century, I guess, and Shakespeare, Richard Shakespeare, and Edmund. And they don't, in those years, you didn't survive too well. But there were some interesting connections. This is the sister Joan married William Hart, and this is the last 14th grandniece, the baby, who was baptized in Shakespeare's church, where Shakespeare was a rector. And he's descended from the Bard's younger sister, and his daughter Susanna, the playwright's daughter Susanna, the great gospel. Well, those are some of the boys in Mary Arnold's farm still today. There's a large farm, but you were not allowed to hunt deer. That was a penalty. It was poaching deer, and they said Shakespeare got arrested for that. And they also said he recited lines to the cattle. You believe that? And these are some of the lines. I thought you might be interested how much of our language has been influenced by Shakespeare. Unbelievable. Martin Luther fixed the German language up. But these languages, you've heard these. The game is afoot. Give the devil his due. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Jealousy is the green-eyed monster, heart of gold, voice with his own petard. The ill wind which blows no man to good. In my heart of heart, my mind's eye, to kill with kindness. Knock, knock, who's there? And you thought that was stop. Live long day, love is blind, milk of human kindness flowing in every vein. For sin against and sinning, play fast and loose, set my teeth on edge. Wear my heart upon my sleeve and a wild goose chase. We've all used those words. And they come back from Shakespeare's plays and quotes, which became incredibly, there's another whole bunch. All our yesterdays are lighted fools to dusty death. As good luck would have it, as merry as the day is long, bated breath, be all and be end all, neither a borrower nor a lender be. Brave the world, break the ice. Brevity is the soul of wit. Refuse to budge an inch. Cold's comfort. Conscience doth make cowards of us all. Crack of doom, dead as a doornail, a dish fit for the gods. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Devil incarnate, eaten me out of house and home. Faint-hearted, fancy free, forever and a day, for goodness sake, foregone conclusion and full circle. These have all become part of our language. It's another problem. He added 2,000 words to our language. We have no idea what they mean. For example, if you watch Twelfth Night, the girl turns to her brother and says, "That does not fadge." We're not too sure what fadge means. Or in Hamlet, that was a leaded Polax or a sledded Polak. Where'd you get that? What's a sledded Polak? It rhymes. Now, Goodwill had a heart of gold, but didn't see himself as the be all and end all. He was born into a brave new world. As good luck would have it, he refused to budge an inch when he arrived in London. When the theater was considered the devil incarnate, he was not faint-hearted or fancy-free, but played it fast and loose and was more sinned against than sinning. Every one of those lines is from Shakespeare plays. And we use them as part of our language today. Now, there's his ancestry thing. Richard Shakespeare, born in 1561, we think was Henry V's dresser, I guess. And Robert Arden was a very wealthy farmer. He married, you can see the children married, and you can see the whole line coming down. The Shakespeare descendants still living. To rap against Shakespeare that he was not a noble, so how could he know about kings and queens? He did. Everybody did. We think of this as a very antique time. It's very dirty, but they had newspapers, they had hit songs, they had all of that stuff floating around, very dirty. This is Mary's Farm again, and it's out on the outskirts of Stratford-on-Avon, which is a beautiful little town, and now everything is Shakespeare. This is a great story. This is Anne Hathaway's cottage. Now, Annie lived through the woods from Shakespeare's house in the back of Stratford-on-Avon. When Will Shakespeare, she was about 28. She was not married. We're not sure how much. So Will used to sneak through the woods. And we say today, what would they say? Hook up with Anne Hathaway and then come back. Well, he was supposed to marry another woman, and then Anne's brothers turned up. It turns out she's pregnant. So Will is 18, she's 28. Here we go. And she gives birth to the twins, whose name are Hamnet and Judith. And he was really obsessed with male and female twins. In fact, he writes them into his plays as male and female identical twins. Well, you know the joke. They can't be. And they keep mistaking. He wrote Comedy of Errors. He wrote Twelfth Night, all about twins. This is his school. Now, there's other rap on Shakespeare was that he knew a little Latin and less Greek, and he couldn't have learned it in the grammar school. Well, his father was probably illiterate and was making gloves. I think the father was a white leather glover, which is the fancy gloves you make for ladies, as opposed to red leather gloves, which you use for saddles. My family, for 750 years, probably preceding Shakespeare, were red leather tanners in Germany. The town is still a center of tanning. Now, this is Shakespeare's grammar school, which still exists, and he writes very sympathetically. The puking schoolboy who wends his way unwittingly to school. Obviously, he didn't like it, but he must have had one ear for the language. That Gilbert died. He was a haberdasher. You can see his signature there. Now, this is the line that goes with the event for the Queen. And you look at the language.
This is Shakespeare's original language. 200 years later, Dr. Samuel Johnson and a guy named Steves decide that they're going to rewrite Shakespeare because, after all, this grammar is bad. And now, it was pronounced differently too. But I think, again, that since this is the same period that America's being settled, I think this is our English, not the British, because it came across the water. And he's talking about this event of all the floats going around Kenilworth Castle. And another thing to notice is the capitals. I picked Tucker's idea, not mine. But the capitals are used. Also, he intersperses you and thou. If it's thou, it's formal. If it's you, it's informal. And the reason for it was no actor ever got a complete script. The actor got the line before his and the line after his rolled up. So it's you give an actor to this day his role. And that's what that was. And they had a book holder on the stage, more on that in a minute. And the actor had to listen to what the other fellow was saying to know when his cue came in. There were supposedly no female actors, but I'm not too sure about that. So this would be pronounced, and he wants emphasis on the capital letters. So now you don't have to rehearse, you just have to memorize your lines. My gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest since once, and ignore, don't stop at the end of the line because there's no punctuation. So, my gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew chill at her song, and certain stars shot madly from the spheres to hear the sea maid's music. Every time I say, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth. Cupid, all armed, a certain aim he took in a fair vestal, thrown by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from the bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. But I might see young Cupid's fiery shaft, quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon, and the imperial votress passed on in maiden meditation fancy free. Yet mark I, with a bolt of Cupid fell upon a little western flood. Now, what does that mean to the Shakespearean actor? First of all, you went to see a play to hear it, not see it. And second of all, there was no amplification, right? And this is the castle and another picture of the castle. That one. Now, this is St. Mary's over the river. St. Mary's over the river is on the south bank. And if you've been to London, the south bank was a rough, nasty, crime-ridden part of London. It was up until several years ago. That's Mary's St. The locals call it St. Mary's Ovary. Now, this is what the theaters looked like then. They didn't start out as theaters. They were a ring for bear baiting and bull baiting. Something that not so popular anymore. It was, they would tie a bull to a post, let the bulldogs loose. And then you'd bet on which dog died or the bull died. It's like FanDuel today. You know, pick your favorite animal. If you look at a bulldog, anybody have a bulldog? You ever notice how their teeth are? The teeth on a bulldog are like this, where the teeth on another dog, if you've got, is like this. So the female can cut the umbilical cord, but on a bulldog, you want them to stick to the bull's side. So they have lower jaws, and it's pretty nasty sport. They also let them loose on bears. And the other thing, the bull baiting is very interesting too, from the sense that the bull had to be baited to be tender meat. And they still do that today. The bull has to have a shot of adrenaline before they execute him. So, this is London back in the day. Now, the big problem, you look at the Thames River there, that was their drinking water and their sewer. And that brings disease. All the
See the boats across the river? Those were all prostitutes. Because of the disease and plagues, they figured that if the prostitute stays in a bath, she won't get sick. But who owned the prostitutes? Who got all the money? The pimp was the Bishop of Winchester. So if you know Shakespeare today, they will say she's a Winchester geese, which means she's a hooker. 75% of London in this era got syphilis to make things even worse. So it was not a great place to live. And there's the well, this is one of the early theaters. We'll try something else. Now it's here, but not there.
Oh,
It's here now. That worked, Jerry.
I don't know. Working on my end over here. Whatever. I know. Let me see.
Okay.
It's, yeah, but why is it not?
It never is.
Oh, all right. Hold on.
You got it? Let's go back one. This is the only drawing that we've got. Elizabethan theater, which was done by a Spanish visitor. You look at the front. The platform was 6 feet high because people jump up on the stage, throw something. It was interactive theater. If you were noble and sitting up there at the third level, locked in with your lady love behind the door, and you come out and you, hey, you with the cape, what just happened? And Shakespeare would fill in a whole big speech. Now the book holder held this script down there, 39 actors. They doubled. They were shareholders, they got money as they went along. In the back, there were 2 doors. The left-hand door to you is the door from the town. The door from the right is out into the countryside. There was no real scenery. I'll show you what the reproduction looks like. It was a small theater. When you came in, you paid a penny to stand in the ground. Now they still have groundlings today, as they were called, and they would load up because on Monday was a brand new play, and we had to see if you liked it. So they had these little baskets of apples called pippins. If they didn't like the show, they threw them at the stage. The other problem was no bathrooms. What did you do? The men went to the wall. The women just didn't wear underwear and let it go. So we found horsehair, human excrement all over the floor. Now, to make this worse, the Elizabethans did not believe in bathing. You bathe once a year and wash your hair twice. So they all brought garlic to the theater to hold it under their nose because it smelled better than the person standing next to them. Today's theater, they put about 1,300 people in the ground. But in Shakespeare's theater, which is smaller, they put 1,500 people jammed in there. But listen, now the other problem was you couldn't do a show until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Would you know? So, and there were no lights. And the pit band was up at the top there with a flag. Now the flag indicates whether or not there's a show. If it's raining, no show. The flag would be green if the show was going. The theater eventually burned down because they used cannonballs to make thunder. They had sound effect, and cannonballs to fire a cannon. Well, they fired a cannon in about 1603, caught a guy in the pants, and set the whole building on fire. So it was kind of crude theater, but it was interactive. If you didn't like it, you just yelled, hey, what's wrong with you? You're not. You can imagine acting that situation. People went to hear. And since all the bars and the stews, they call them, are around the theater, you'd go bang down a couple of drinks, go over see one of the women in the stew, and then go in the theater. So the audience was a challenge. That's why
Shakespeare's plays include ghosts, blood, sex, and corruption. All these ones. This is a picture of the theater they have just found. It is the Curtain Theater. It's up on Shoreditch. Now, Shoreditch, they had leased the property and it became popular. Theater became popular, so the owner wanted it back. And there was a lawsuit, but Shoreditch is where you throw all your garbage over the wall, including dead dogs, dead horses, dead people. And you can see the stage is probably up this way, how small it is. Pierce Brosnan went in and said that you literally whisper in the top row and be heard in the back because it's a very small theater. This again is the stage would be over there, and drainage, and more than likely the groundlings are that way. There were 13 or so theaters in the city of London. Any ways they could, and the church took it over for a while. This is the Rose Theater, which we've been in too. It's underneath an office building. And the Rose Theater was Shakespeare's competitor, Henslow, who kept this theater going and kept a diary. So we have some idea what stuff cost and what he was doing. So John Shakespeare, the old man, had moved to Stratford in 1551. But he got into hard times. So you see down there, son William went to the crown and asked for that. Favorite quotes about the passage of man, and first the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail on the way to school. This is Anne Hathaway, as we talked about a little earlier. She was a little older. Was he supposed to marry? We don't know. And they had several children. We can't figure that out. Because the minute the twins were born, he was off to London. Got a job at the theater, they think, Holy Horses. And then he became a very famous playwright. Now, if you think about this, Monday was a new play. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday were one different play, popular if not. Sunday theaters are closed because it's the Lord's Day. And there was a lot of conflict about it because it's the work of the devil. And this London, you look over here to the right, you'll see the London Bridge. The people lived on the bridge. And on either end of the bridge, there was a guard at night, so you couldn't cross it. And the Tower of London is across the street. And the Tower of London, when they beheaded somebody, they put the heads on a pike across the bridge to warn people. Well, the interesting thing about that to me is that at night, the relatives would come and steal the head and put it back in the coffin. Well, couldn't have that. So the night watchman's job was to make sure there were the same number of heads. And that's called counting heads. We still say that today. We count the heads. That's from that era. This is the theater as we've reconstructed it. And you can see this is probably the model of the one that exists now. The 6-foot-high stage. Backstage was called the tiring house, so the place you put your costumes on. And with the characters kept changing their costumes. And backstage, there's only one left, was a plat, which is a running order, a big script of when you went on as whom. Because if you're a townsperson in Act 1, Scene 3, you could be a soldier in Act 5, you know? So it was a different kind of theater. Now, if you paid a penny, you got here, another penny up there, and a third penny up there. And if you wanted to be comfy, you could rent a box and sit on the box with a pillow, and that was rented from the box office. So, and again, this is really influenced them.
I have a question.
Sure, jump in. I'm, you know,
The theater, was that open?
yes.
So in the winter, there were no performances.
No, it's still open. The new one is still open. And were we there in the rain? I think we were in there in the rain. And if you pay extra 2 cents in those years, you sat underneath. If you didn't, you were the groundlings. Now, the groundlings were not nice people. They were armed. It's one of the few audiences in our history where the men were carrying a gun and a sword. You worry about that, you know. So he may have traveled to Europe. I think he did. Because of the plague, he goes to all these different places: Mantua, Venice, Tempest, Verona, Padua, Verona, Florence, France, Rome, Greece, Vienna, and Denmark. And there is a belief that they traveled through the European just to get away from the plague, which was killing people. Now, this is, as you can see, all the maps. Now, my favorite, all the maps of where he was doing these plays. But here's my question: which play was set in America?
No, Tempest.
Thank you. Boy, you knew that. You jumped right in there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Which one was that?
The Tempest. Because his neighbors from Stratford-on-Avon took a boat to Roanoke, Virginia, and the boat capsized the ship. And 3 years later, they come in with the ship rebuilt up the Thames. And we think, again, that Shakespeare got letters from them. So they land on a Sunday. He wrote the play on Monday. Wow. Which is kind of interesting how he said, never blotted a line. He just had the plot figure. Has anybody ever seen The Tempest? It's a movie with Helen Mirren now. Usually who played that? John Gielgud. This is Hamlet's Castle. We've all heard of Hamlet's Castle, Elsinore in Denmark. And some scholars claim he was never there. He used an atlas to draw the picture of the castle, but we were there. I don't think so. I really think he was there just because of the feel and the description and just everything about it. And it's really kind of grim. It was the Comedy of Errors, the two noble kinsmen, Troilus and Cressida. There it is. I suspect he may have been there. Florence, he wrote Much Ado and Nothing, and that is Florence. Venice and Padua, The Merchant of Venice, and Othello. Now, this is, I was talking about how dirty London was. First of all, there's no sanitation, nothing. So when you get up in the morning and you see the windows out over the street, this is one of the few streets that is left after the fire of London. And the idea was you were sleeping upstairs. And again, sleeping in a hotel or an inn was different. You slept 6 to a bed, and if you got up to use the bathroom, usually a spot was taken when you got back. And one of the big problems they had, people using a burning fire as a bathroom. First thing you did when you get up is throw your chamber pot out the window. And that is why, to this day, ladies walk on the inside so they don't get stuff spilled on them. It was pretty, they must have had a very high merchantry. This again is one of the last houses with the leaded panes and the timber. This is an original house. There's, I think, very few of them. Now, Shakespeare's theater on the pastime Bull and Bear, you can see where they were on the left-hand side of the Thames. There was bear baiting, bull baiting, BOMB, and these then morphed into the theaters. Both. Let me show you some of the neighborhood. Now, we felt when I was there, we were there, that I needed to have a beer in honor of William Shakespeare, because that's the bar he used to drink in. I thought that's pretty cool. And this is what they did, is they put barrels out front with boards on them and make them into a stage. And then eventually it moved into the theater. This was cheaper. And there they are with the stage. You have a bench, and then the actors were up on the stage. Everybody else is, This is a drawing of bear baiting, which is pretty cool. But this was about on the same level as performance thing. And this is the south bank of the Thames. Not as much as it is today. It still bends this way. But there were 13 or so theaters in there. and you could work your way around. And this was a terrible neighborhood. You went in armed, as you did up until the 60s and 70s. So you can see how it morphed. The cathedrals are across the river because the royalty decided that you couldn't put a theater on the same side of the river as a play, a large cathedral. St. Paul's is up there. Oh, we saw that picture. Again, this is the same, a much more organized view. And this is the one that they used to build the theater that is there today. When they went to rebuild the theater, they didn't know where it was. And so they built it, they guessed, and found out they were 900 yards away from the river. Here, retiring rooms where you change your costume, discovery space, trapdoor. Oh, if you come from the trapdoor, you're coming from hell. If you come, you're coming from heaven. Elizabethan convention was a wardrobe gallery, but it was all timber and straw. And today, the new theater is the only building in London with timber and straw. This is, I believe, the Globe Theater. It is now covered up with a parking lot because there was a historic building on top of it. You see the gentleman there is standing on the stage, we think, and you can see it's not very wide, it goes up. And there was a problem. This is the Bishop of Winchester. That was his cathedral. That's all that's left of it. And he would collect a percentage from each prostitute to raise money for the church. I don't think that's so popular today. This is the Clink, which was up the street from the bishop. It's a jail. Hence we get the word today, Clink. And on the outside around the corner, they would put him in the gibbet. They put him in a metal frame and just let him hang there until he died. And that, as you're walking down the street, oh, hi, you're looking up at him. This is the new Globe Theater. This is the one that stands today. It was rebuilt by Sam Wanamaker. And it has a sprinkler system on the roof. And it's the only one built out of wood, plaster, and the sprinkler system. This is what it looks like from the inside. They do know that if you look up, there is that's the heavens. That tells you that's the heavens. And you can see where the seats are. We sat right up there in the middle to see 12th Night. And all the groundlings stand on the ground in the bottom. And oh, by the way, they sold refreshments. I don't have them anymore, but they'd sell you refreshments. They had a little ceramic thing with a slot in it. You put your money in it. And then they took it back to the box office and smashed it so nobody could steal. And they had a little flagon, which felt like that with ale. Now, you couldn't drink the water in London. And all the kids drank ale at 7 a.m. because the water was so polluted. So now you figure this audience is armed. They're using the room as a men and ladies' room, and they're carrying weapons. That to me makes Shakespeare's plays so fascinating that anything can happen. They could throw things at you. Somebody could shoot a gun off, whatever. And despite all this, and that never mind the poetry, despite all this, is that he could make money. He could do this kind of language. He could be that brilliant in front of facing all of that. This is what the play performance looks like today. The groundlings are on the bottom. And then everybody moves up. The really wealthy set up high. And you can see there's no scenery. And here's the kicker for people doing Shakespearean plays. There are no stage directors. None. You have to be pretty creative to make it work. And that's why the high schools struggle with it so much, because all they can think about is saying the words instead of listening, setting up. You can set it anywhere. The performance we did with African-American 8th graders, they got it. And what they did is just use boxes on the stage in modern dress, and it worked fine. Romeo and Juliet. Father doesn't want her to marry that guy, So this is Burbage. Richie Dickey Burbage friend of Shakespeare. He played every single lead in the play. If you saw Romeo, who was 14, that was Dickie Burbage. If you saw Hamlet of King Lear, who was older, there was Dickie Burbage. Now, he said he never called for a line. He knew every line. He didn't need the book holder, but he was a short little guy with a beard, and he was a terrible, terrible swordsman. He was awful. So every play that you see, the actor, for example, Horatio fighting Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet, gets killed because he's a horrible, and they say it up front, oh, he's a terrible swordsman. And then Hamlet, at the end, Hamlet loses his life because he's not going to do well against Laertes. And in Romeo and Juliet, going back to that, this guy, he pushes Romeo out of the way, and Horatio fights for him. Because Dickie was also an artist. And that painting is from Dulwich College, which is in London now. And can you imagine? You were not there to imagine that he looked like Leonardo DiCaprio, but that you could hear what was being said to him. By the way, they were rivals. One little story. They were chasing some girl and woman, and they left a note. Burbage said, "I'll see you after the show in your room," and he left a note on her door. "I shall see you afterwards." Well, maybe this is apocryphal, maybe it's not. But it's there after the show, and he signed it, by the way, Richard III. He got there, he found a note, said, "I was here first, William I," the Shakespeare who had. This is probably Shakespeare's son, but we're not sure. He was having an affair with the Dark Lady. Have you heard of the Dark Lady? Well, they found out that in London, the women were obsessed with white skin, and they used a makeup based in white lead. It didn't help them too much, but what they started to do was import Africans as maids of waiting and whatever else, so they would look whiter. And suddenly they looked around, Queen Elizabeth, where did all these black people come from? So Shakespeare, not wanting to miss a bet, wrote Othello. And we think, if you read his sonnets, that he was having an affair with the Dark Lady. My mistress is nothing like the sun, he says. And they think that this is his descendant. He left Stratford-on-Avon to go to London. He came back home when he was older. I don't know how that worked out, but it was the Oxford Road. There was an innkeeper with an an African wife. I think that this was his son, who became a famous actor. Now, if you look at this, this is in the old language, and we'll skip because we just did that. And this, to me, is one of the most heart-rending Shakespearean passages. He lost his son at age 11, Hamlet, and didn't know where he was buried. To the plague, they're not too sure. Meanwhile, he wrote into his plays the death of a child. "Young Arthur is my son, he is lost. I am not mad. I would to heaven I were for them, 'tis like I should forget myself. Or if I could, what grief should I forget? Preach some philosophy to make me mad. Thou shalt be canonized cardinal for being not mad, but sensible of grief. My reasonable part produces reason, how I may be delivered. Teaches me to kill or hang myself. If I were mad, I should forget my son, or madly think the babe of the clouds. For he, I am not mad too well. Too well, I feel the different plague of each calamity. I tore them from their bonds and cried aloud, oh, that these hands could so redeem my son, as they have given these hairs their liberty. And now I envy at their liberty, and I will again commit them to their father. Because my poor child is a prisoner, and Father Cardinal, I have heard you say that we shall see and know our friends in heaven. If that be true, I shall see my boy again. For since the birth of Cain, the first male child, to him that I did but yesterday suspire. There was not such a gracious creature born, but now will canker sorrow eat my bud and chase the native beauty from his cheek, and he will look as hollow as a ghost, as dim and meager as an ague's fit, and so he'll die. and rising soon again, when I shall meet him in the court of heaven, I shall not know him. Therefore, never, never must I behold my pretty Arthur more. And that's about two children's deaths in two different plays. Now, The Tempest, and this is kind of an interesting ending to this. The sea venture crashes on the way to Bermuda and Jamestown, Virginia. John Wheat, founder of Prince George Colony, Maryland, related to William Wheat of Shakespeare's neighborhood, along with William Barker, Richard Quinney, John Sadler, part of the country's development. John Sadler was John Harvard's brother-in-law, and his sister married Richard Quinney, whose brother married Judith Shakespeare. Some say the news of the wreck got highlighted to the bar during The Tempest. John Harvard owned a bar off near the Playhouse, comes to America with 600 pounds and starts Harvard College. So if anybody gets really snippy about how elegant Harvard College is, pardon this. Shakespeare died in 1616. Not long after he and his friends Heming and Condell were home this place for publication. There was no royalty or copyrights in those years. And Bell and Hemings were lawyers. The firm still exists today. And they published the folio, and here's the issue. When he comes home, they think that she was a Lollard Puritan and didn't like the theater at all. So Shakespeare goes to live with his daughter Judith, and the house burns down with all his papers in it. So they put this folio together, the only accredited work. And she dies in 1623, but her next husband, they think, dies after that, needs money and sells the book. She would not sell it. He was not a part of the translation of Shakespeare of the Bible, the King James, because of his connection by relation to the gunpowder plot and because of his family's evident Catholicism. But next to his grave, you're going to find this Psalm 46. Shakespeare was reportedly Catholic, which we now see, but he was a rector of that church, which is kind of strange. But he also was not hired because of the gunpowder plot by Fawkes. By King James hired 40 poets to translate the Bible, as we know the King James Bible, but not Shakespeare. But we think that next to his grave, God is our refuge and strength, the very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be moved, know the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, through the waters thereof roar and be troubled, through the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. So on. There's a river, the stream whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of tabernacles of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God shall help her, that right early. Heathen rage, the kingdoms were moved, he uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he hath made in the earth. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in fire. Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. And you can see Will Shakespeare. And if you go to his grave, you will find that next to it. You'll see the grave over there. He said, a good friend, don't touch my bones. He said, by the way, the Victorians dug them up and found absolutely nothing in the grave. This is a death mask, which is in Darmstadt, Germany. That's all I know. And I keep wondering, what would happen if you took the DNA out of that thing? We get another little Willie? But this is the last passage, and I'll end with this, from The Tempest. Prospero, who they think Shakespeare played, uses this line to talk about his retirement. Shakespeare was losing his facilities. He testified in a court case and said, I'm losing my memory. I have no memory. And he packed up, took his money, and went home and stopped writing. He said, I can't write anymore. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff that dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. That's it. Thank you. Any questions here?